You ever notice in the modern horror movie, there's always somebody in full panic mode? They're very easy to spot because usually they're screaming at the top of their lungs, they're running into things, and they're constantly looking over their shoulders. They are so out of control, they don't even realize that they've run into a wooded area and tripped over a hidden tree root. Now, right behind them is somebody who's not panicked, and they're walking at the same unfettered pace like they haven't a care in the world. However, they do have one goal in mind, and that is to murder without apprehension the poor panicked person who just tripped over the hidden tree root. They are completely in control, and panic has not feared their accomplishment. What do we do with this? How do we learn to deal with this stressful situation? Well, it depends on which of these two characters you just identified with. So before I explain, I don't offend anybody in the audience, but with a raise of hands, do we have any serial killers with us here today? Anybody? I do see one hand in the control room. Okay. I think that's very plausible. So Hollywood feels they do have a solution to this. It comes down to one word: franchise. Friday the 13th, part 27, anybody? From my favorite TV miniseries, The Band of Brothers, there's this amazing speech that's given to a very scared soldier in a foxhole. Lieutenant Spears tries to convince him that instead of being afraid that he is going to die, he needs to accept the fact that he is already dead. Only then could he become the true soldier he was trained to be. I've thought about this so many times. Instead of being afraid to fail, if I just convinced myself that I've already failed, then I could move on. And that is a positive direction. It's a hard concept to understand. And I sincerely hope that none of you had to deal with any of this horror. However, I have been in television production for 42 years, and I have plenty of horror stories to share with you. But before I do, I want to give you a little background for context. All my life, I had wanted to be a professional baseball player. I had the desire, the dream, and the skills. I just didn't have it. There's a term used for individuals who have been granted with a gift from a higher authority. He has it. It? I had a lot of its, but not the one for baseball. So I'm a senior in high school, and my team, the Parkville Knights, was playing in the state championship baseball game. I was co-captain of the team and just happened to be the catcher when our pitcher was throwing very erratically, a lot of balls in the dirt, and I was getting really upset. I kept looking over at the manager, waiting for him to call timeout and go talk to him, but he wasn't. So I decided to do it myself. I turned to the umpire, I called timeout, and I headed for the mound. I started to jog at first, and then I slowed my pace to the aforementioned serial killer walk. As I got closer, I could see the anxiety in his eyes, and I decided to change my approach. Normally, I would have been like, "Come on, man, you're killing me. Let's throw some strikes out here. Let's go." But that wouldn't have helped, and it probably just would have created more anxiety. So I decided to pivot. I calmly walked up to him, and I said, "Hey, you see that brunette in the second row?" He's like, "What?" I said, "The brunette, right over my shoulder." "Yeah? I heard her talking. She wants to meet you after the game." "Really?" "Yeah." "Wow." "So I want you to rear back and bring me the heat like I know you can." Then I handed him the baseball, and I turned and walked away. I had no idea if there even was a brunette in the second row. I just knew I needed to remove him from that stressful situation so hopefully he could clear his head and concentrate. And guess what? It worked. The very next pitch was a 95-mile-an-hour fastball right down the middle of the plate. Unfortunately, the batter fouled it off, and it hit me dead in the crotch. Anybody here ever take a 95-mile-an-hour fastball to the crotch? Anybody? Serial killer? Just for the record, it hurts real bad. I mean, the pain was coming out of the ends of my hair. When I could finally get up and speak English again, I remember thinking to myself about all the stressful situations I had where I asked for help. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. But I realized that there was many times that I could do it myself. So to put myself through college, I worked part-time, 24 hours a week, as a cook at Bob's Big Boy in Glen Burnie. I didn't have a lot of time, so I used to work Friday and Saturday nights from 5 p.m. until 5 a.m. As soon as I would clock in, I would be underwater with the dinner rush, and it would last for hours. Then at 2 a.m., when all the bars closed, every drunk in Glen Burnie would come in. It was pretty overwhelming at times, and I remember once looking down and counting 53 over easy eggs on the grill at the same time. 53, that's astounding. But it was situations like this that helped me learn how to deal with the feelings of being overwhelmed and stressed by taking the big picture and breaking it down into smaller ones, which made it a lot easier to handle. I'll give you an example. I was training another cook once, and a ticket came in. Had a grilled cheese, it had a order of pancakes, a well-done steak, and a Cobb salad. I watched him as he buttered 2 slices of bread and threw it on the grill. Then he started to make some pancakes, and that's when I stopped him. I learned that when you're working as a cook, you need to work backwards. I looked at the check, and you find what is the longest thing to cook, and that obviously is the steak, so I threw that on the grill. When that happens, I can then look at the next check and see what's going on at table number 9. When the steak was halfway done, I started the grilled cheese, then the pancakes, then the salad. The idea is when you work backwards, everything gets done at the same time, and everything left the kitchen hot, well, except for the salad. A few years later, I was training to be a television editor, and I learned the same practice applied, working backwards. The client would spend hours in the audio room. That's where they would record the voiceovers and the narration and gather all the sound effects and music for their spot. By the time they came in the video, they would have a 30 or 60-second audio track, which we used as the foundation of the commercial we would then edit. We would take hours creating animations and graphics and all the type that goes on the screen. We even had hours and hours of running footage of every car you could possibly think of. One night we were doing a job for Bill Kidd's Toyota. I was really excited about this because 1, I was still in training. 2, these clients were pretty funny. And 3, I heard a rumor we might be working late into the night, and I was kind of interested in that. They ended up spending 10 hours in the audio room. They didn't even get to the video suite till 7 p.m. We knew it was going to be a late night. We just didn't know how late. At 1 in the morning, we started getting a little slap happy. And by 3 a.m., we were laughing at everything. At 4 in the morning, the client handed me the 1/4-inch Audio Master and asked me to go make a copy. Still laughing, I took the tape and walked out of the room. I had to pause on the other side of the door because it dawned on me I had no idea how to make a copy of an audio tape. However, one of the its I mentioned earlier was my affliction to being a smartass. So I calmly walked over to the art room, I laid it on the glass of the Xerox machine, and I made a copy. They were laughing hysterically when I came back and said, "Here's your master, and here's your copy." I was the funniest man in the room. At 5 a.m., the editor threaded the tape onto a machine called the Nagra, and he hit play. This is what we heard. Apparently, the Xerox machine had bulk erased the master tape, and it was gone. Ruh-roh. As you can imagine, the demeanor in the room changed instantly, and I was no longer considered funny. I knew I had 2 choices. I could freak out like the clients were, or I could face the onslaught and try to rectify the situation. The mistake was real, and it was loud. But I knew panic was not going to bring that audio back. I also knew the clients had already bought and paid for their airtime and were hoping to air more than a big black hole. So I took a deep breath, lowered my own heart rate, and I pivoted from blame to plan. It was that moment that all the chaos disappeared. Stress is loud, but it's not smart. And when you lower the audio of it, you're able to think clearly again. I knew all the elements used to make that tape were still in audio. So I calmly explained that to the clients, told them we could rectify this, and I took the tape and walked out of the room. I had only walked a few steps when I walked right into the owner, who happened to be the audio guy. When I told him what happened, expecting the worst, he just smiled and said, "Panic never solves anything. Follow me." He took me into the audio room, and he presented me with a protection master. Today, we would call that a backup. Minutes later, it was threaded on the Nagra machine, and the edit session was saved. What did I learn here? Back up everything. And I do. I even back up the backups. I put them on separate drives. I store them in separate places. I even created a unique labeling and retrieval system, which enables me to find even one element in a room full of thousands almost instantaneously. This mistake enabled me to become a better editor. A couple years later, I was working at Channel 13. I was hired to edit a TV show called Evening Magazine, but every 7 weeks or so, I would get rotated into news. News is an interesting ordeal. I was working the second shift, so I edited the 6 and the 11. And we were usually done the 11 by about 9:30, so we had about an hour and a half to kick back and relax. News is broken down into blocks. You have the A block, which is all the top stories, then the B block, then the C block. The D and E block are weather and sports. And there's commercial breaks between all of these. The producer will take a clock starting at 30 minutes, and when she starts it, it runs backwards down to 0. News runs backwards. Everything was going right until one night it was 10:52, and we heard a loud scream over the PA, "Everybody has to come to the assignment desk stat." I'll never forget the date. It was January 18th, 1990. We all got to the assignment desk, and a very panicked producer explained to us that the mayor of Washington, D.C., Marion Barry, had just been caught in an undercover sting operation buying crack cocaine from a prostitute in a hotel room. We needed to redo the A block, and we had 8 minutes to do it. Assignments were handed out, and everybody took off. I was given the first 2 stories because I was considered a fast editor, and working backwards, I did the second story first. It was a 30-second VO, and I threw in some footage, and we moved on. So now I'm doing the first story. I'm compiling my shots when the producer came running into my edit suite in a complete panic mode. She's freaking out because she doesn't think we're going to get done in time. She didn't know what I knew, like exactly how long it took to rewind and eject the tape, or how many steps it was from my edit suite to the playback machine for air. These were little tidbits of information I had locked away in my brain because after working for years as an editor and a cook, I had become hyper-observant. I noticed everything, and I counted everything. How many of you have ever been in your dentist office staring at the ceiling and you start counting the tiles? You do that out of boredom. I do that out of necessity, and it has saved me many, many times. With 50 seconds to go before the start of the show, she starts screaming. She sounded like a rock singer holding out a long high note. Ah! I looked at her and I just laughed, and I put in my last shot, looked at the clock, rewound the tape and ejected it. I walked over to the playback machine and I inserted it. 5 seconds later, the director said, "Roll tape 1," and I hit play. I turned around to find the producer lying on the floor, visibly vibrating. At the post-mortem after the show, she explained that some of the other editors never even finished their stories because they just ran out of time and they panicked, and the anchors had to ad-lib to cover the lack of footage. Then she turned to me and asked me what my problem was. I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "I wasn't human because I didn't panic at all." I told her I was panicking like crazy. I'd never wanted a cigarette so much in my life, and I don't even smoke. But I took that energy and I just turned it into effort. This will help all the time, even in a life or death situation. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. A few years later, found me in Hollywood, California. I had the extreme pleasure of working as a grip on some movies like For a Few Good Men. I was an editor on some projects from Ren and Stimpy to the Golf Channel. There's a lot of stress and a lot of patience needed in Hollywood. And that's when I learned that patience is a big eater of stress. You really, really need to encounter patience to deal with these people. Now, what I determined was if they had the money, I had the time. And I became very patient with that. However, nothing prepared my patience for working right here in Baltimore, Maryland. I had the unbelievable pleasure of videotaping and editing the very first full face transplant at Shock Trauma. It was a 36-hour operation and the most incredible thing I'd ever been a part of. I mean, these amazing surgeons were removing somebody's face, tongue, and jaw and transplanting it onto another living human being. It was astounding. I was standing in a full bunny suit on a lift shooting straight down into the operation. You can't even imagine what you see, smell, and hear in an operating room. And I don't just mean from the table. These surgeons, they were talking just like you and I would at our jobs. They're talking about sports and the next Lady Gaga song. It was fascinating, but at the same time, they were very painstakingly sewing the nerve endings of fibers on a live human face. I remember thinking if this was 25 years earlier, I'd be freaking out. I would have probably even thrown up, but I was calm and cool and very collected. I shot what I needed to, and I got everything done. One thing I noticed, they were working backwards. All the surgeons were doing their little pieces until they put it all together, the big piece, and it was timed absolutely perfectly. You know, everybody has stress. Everybody panics. You need to figure out what works for you before you implement it. The best piece of advice I ever had was from my father, but it wasn't given to me. It was given about me. As you can imagine, I was a bit of a hellion as a child, and my dad was getting ready to go to work one day, and he looked over at my mother, and he looked at me, and he looked back to my mother, and he said to her, "If you can't face the day, back into it." I have been backing into life ever since. Thank you very much.